Hey guys, tonight we drift back to the early 1520s, and you find yourself in Rome, the glittering jewel of Renaissance Europe. The year is not 1527 yet. It's just before the storm, when the eternal city still glows with confidence, wealth, and dazzling art. You're standing in a city that feels like a living museum, where every piazza, every fountain, and every wall sings with marble and fresco. The hum of human voices fills the air. Cardinals in crimson robes striding to councils, artists with paint-stained hands, bargaining with patrons, merchants from Florence and Venice shouting over the price of silks, spices, and manuscripts. Rome feels invincible, as though it has risen from its medieval shadows to reclaim the majesty of its ancient self. But here's the thing, you probably won't survive what's coming. Because while you're staring up at Michelangelo's freshly painted Sistine Chapel ceiling and craning your neck at Raphael's shimmering frescoes, armies are stirring to the north. Armies that care nothing for frescoes or statues or Renaissance ideals. They're hungry, unpaid, and angry, and soon they'll be heading straight for this paradise. And stay with me, because tonight you'll see how the splendor of Renaissance Rome, built by popes and princes, is about to be torn apart by soldiers who've had enough of waiting for their wages. So let's walk these streets together before the storm breaks. You start in the heart of the city, at the Campo de' Fiori. Today it's a lively square of stalls and vendors, baskets brimming with fruit, spices, and bolts of coloured cloth. The smell of roasting meat drifts from taverns, mingling with the sweetness of oranges, just unloaded from Naples. Hawkers shout prices, coins clink. Laughter bubbles up from drinkers already well into their wine before noon. To your right, you see the palaces of noble families like the Farnese rising over the square, grand stone reminders that this city is as much about power as it is about prayer. Rome in the 1520s is a place of contrasts. On one hand you have opulence, cardinals who ride in gilded coaches, servants sweeping the streets before them, feasts that pile roasted peacocks high on silver platters. On the other hand, there are beggars clustering at church doors, the poor crammed into crumbling medieval houses, living in the shadow of grandeur they'll never touch. But this inequality doesn't make the city feel weak. It feels alive, buzzing with ambition, rivalry, and pride. You wander toward the Vatican, where Pope Clement VII, a Medici by birth, presides over Christendom. The Vatican is the beating heart of this Renaissance capital, its courtyards filled with scholars debating theology, artists at work on canvases, and clerics rushing from one meeting to the next. You pass the Sistine Chapel, where Michelangelo's vision of creation arches above worshippers' heads, Adam and God reaching across the ceiling in a scene so fresh it seems like heaven itself has just breathed on the plaster. Rome's reputation as the cultural capital of Europe is unmatched. Raphael's frescoes at the Vatican Palace dazzle visitors with their bright colors and perspective. Bramante's designs for the new Peter's Basilica still rise slowly, stone by stone, into a massive dome that promises to dwarf every other church in Christendom. Poets, humanists, and scholars cluster in taverns to argue Plato and Aristotle late into the night, while printers churn out books that spread new ideas far beyond Rome's walls. But the art and the learning are built on politics, and politics here are complicated. Pope Clement VII, nephew of Lorenzo de' Medici, is ambitious but cautious. He dreams of holding Italy together against the tug-of-war between France and the Holy Roman Empire, but he often hesitates when boldness is needed. Rome glitters with the wealth of the papacy, yet that wealth is fragile, stretched thin by wars, debts, and the endless costs of construction. You hear it in whispers, cardinals grumbling about unpaid stipends, workers complaining their wages are late. The beauty of Renaissance Rome rests on shaky financial legs. The streets reflect this duality. By day they burst with color, silks from Florence, spices from the Levant, jewels from Venice, pilgrims streaming toward relics in St. Peter's. By night they darken into danger. Gangs prowl alleys, knife fights break out between rival noble families, torches sputter in the wind as shadows stretch over ruined ancient forums. Rome may be a city of art, but it's also a city where survival can feel precarious. You walk across the Tiber on the Ponte Sant'Angelo, where angel statues line the way to the hulking Castel Sant'Angelo. The fortress looms over the city like a brooding giant, its round walls a reminder that even in this age of splendor, defense is never forgotten. Inside, the papal treasury and escape routes wait. Clement VII will come to know those stone corridors all too well in a few years, but for now, they seem like part of a distant past, a medieval relic in a Renaissance city. Still, you can sense unease beneath the splendor. Rome has enemies. Beyond the Alps, King Francis I of France and Emperor Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire are locked in brutal rivalry, their armies clashing across Italy in the Italian Wars. The Pope, trying to play both sides, shifts alliances like a gambler hedging bets. Today he leans toward France, tomorrow he courts the Emperor. It keeps Rome diplomatically alive, but it also makes her a target. Ordinary Romans, though, don't think much about geopolitics. They revel in festivals, processions, and feasts. Carnival season is especially raucous. Masked revelers pour into the streets, jugglers perform in squares, and fireworks crackle against the night sky. From your vantage point, you watch cardinals tossing coins to crowds, children chasing painted floats, actors lampooning nobles in bawdy plays. The city seems unstoppable, too proud, too magnificent to fall. But if you listen closely in taverns and markets, rumors creep in. Travelers from the north speak of armies on the move, imperial troops, Spaniards and Germans, many of them unpaid, restless, mutinous. They say these men plunder villages for food, strip churches of relics, and hunger for coin more than glory. Rome, they whisper, is rich and weak, a tempting prize for soldiers with nothing to lose. The locals laugh it off. Rome has walls, soldiers, the Pope's blessing. Besides, hasn't the city survived for centuries? Yet as you walk away, you feel the unease prickling like static in the air. Climb up the Capitoline Hill, and you look out over the city. The ruins of ancient Rome mingle with the new palaces of Renaissance princes. Columns of the Forum stand like broken teeth. Beside them rise the ornate facades of churches glowing with gold. Rome is a city of layers, pagan and Christian, ancient and modern, glory and decay all jumbled together. It feels eternal, yes, but also precarious. And as the sun sets, washing the domes and rooftops in blood-red light, you sense it. The storm is closer than anyone admits. Rome, the Pope's shining city, thinks it stands secure, but in a few short years, the Eternal City will know a sack more brutal than anything since the Gauls. You've just wandered through the splendor of Renaissance Rome, dazzled by frescoes and feasts, but now it's time to peek behind the velvet curtains. Because if Rome in the early 1520s looks like a stage set for a golden age, Pope Clement VII is the nervous director backstage, juggling debts, actors, and angry creditors. The Eternal City may glitter, but its papacy is balancing on a very fragile rope. Clement VII, born Giulio de' Medici, is not some anonymous bishop plucked from obscurity. He is a Medici, nephew of Lorenzo the Magnificent, raised in the richest, most cunning dynasty of Florence. He knows how to calculate, how to maneuver, how to play politics. But here's the problem. Knowing how to play doesn't mean you always win the game. And in 1527, Clement is the guy who sits at the table with too many cards, too little gold, and opponents ready to flip the board. Let's start with Clement's personality. He isn't flamboyant like Julius II, who led troops into battle in armor. He isn't visionary like Leo Tenx, his cousin, who bankrolled Raphael and pushed the arts to new heights. Clement is cautious, analytical, and deeply suspicious of almost everyone. He hesitates. He second-guesses. He stalls decisions until the last moment, which, in the high-speed roller coaster of Italian politics, is basically like standing on the tracks and hoping the train misses you. Spoiler, it doesn't. Financially, Clement inherits a mess. The papacy has been spending like a Renaissance rock star for decades. Julius II poured fortunes into St. Peter's Basilica. Leo Tenx blew through even more on festivals, wars, and indulgences. By the time Clement takes the tiara in 1523, the papal coffers are emptier than a tavern barrel after Carnival. Taxes can't keep up, loans are strangling the city, and creditors are circling. And yet, Clement still has to fund armies, bribe allies, and keep up appearances as the universal shepherd of Christendom. It's like trying to host the world's fanciest dinner party when your pantry only has stale bread and olives. Now, add politics. Italy in the 1520s is not a peaceful peninsula of gondolas and opera singers. It is a chessboard where kings and emperors slam pieces into place with real blood. On one side is Francis I of France, ambitious, charming, and desperate to carve out dominance in Italy. On the other is Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain, who technically rules half of Europe including Naples to the south of Rome. Both men want Italy, and Clement VII, poor man, is stuck in the middle. At first Clement tries to balance. He signs treaties with Charles, then flirts with Francis. He plays both sides like a gambler who doesn't want to commit. It works for a little while, but then disaster strikes in 1525 at the Battle of Pavia. Francis I is crushed, captured by Charles V's forces, and hauled off like an embarrassing trophy. Suddenly, Clement's balancing act collapses. He looks like a fool who bet on the wrong horse. Desperate to restore balance, Clement shifts again. When Francis is released, Clement joins the League of Cognac in 1526, a shiny new alliance with France, Venice, Milan, and Florence, all aimed at clipping Charles V's wings. It sounds good on parchment. In reality, it's like trying to stop a bull with a paper shield. Charles is furious, and his troops, Spanish veterans, German landsknechts, and restless Italians, are restless, unpaid, and hungry. They begin their long, dangerous march towards central Italy. Meanwhile, back in Rome, Clement tries to project strength. He parades in solemn processions, blesses crowds, and assures the faithful that the church stands secure. But behind the walls of the Vatican he frets endlessly. He knows Rome is vulnerable. Its militia is more accustomed to drinking than fighting. Its fortifications, though impressive, are undermanned. The papal treasury is too thin to hire enough mercenaries. And mercenaries, as everyone in the 16th century knows, are only loyal until the coin runs out. The cardinals whisper nervously in corridors. Some argue for peace with Charles, others push for more French support. Clement listens, nods, hesitates. He refuses to commit to bold action, and all the while, rumors of the imperial army's advance drift south like smoke. Ordinary Romans, for now, continue their lives. They celebrate festivals, crowd into churches, sip wine in taverns. But the tension builds. Prices creep upward as food supplies tighten. Guards drill uneasily on the walls. Foreign ambassadors write letters, filled with warnings that Clement refuses to face. You can almost feel the city holding its breath, waiting for something it doesn't quite believe will happen. And here's the tragic irony. Clement VII, with all his Medici cunning, thinks he can still negotiate his way out. He believes that papal prestige, spiritual authority, and clever diplomacy will shield him. But Charles V's army, trudging through Italy, doesn't care about frescoes, relics, or papal bulls. They care about food, pay, and plunder. And when they look south toward Rome, they don't see the eternal city. They see a bank vault, with open doors. You, standing in Clement's Rome, can sense the coming collision. On one side, a cautious pope, with empty coffers and fragile alliances. On the other, a furious emperor and an army of wolves. The dice have already been rolled, and Clement doesn't even realize the game is over. So when the Eternal City falls in 1527, don't just think of ladders and cannons. Think of hesitation, debt, and miscalculation. Think of a pope who blinked one too many times. You've seen Pope Clement VII juggling alliances and debts like a man trying to balance flaming torches on a windy day. Now shift your gaze northward, because the storm that will break over Rome isn't born inside the Vatican. It's marching relentlessly from the plains of Lombardy. The imperial army of Charles V is on the move, and the city that seems like the center of Christendom is about to look like a fat purse to a band of desperate mercenaries. Let's be clear, this is not some perfectly organized imperial expedition with polished banners, full pay chests, and a neat battle plan. What lumbers southward in late 1526 and early 1527 is a Frankenstein's monster of soldiers, mutineers, and opportunists. Spanish veterans from Charles's wars in Italy, German landsknechts hardened in the emperor's service, Italian auxiliaries with loyalties as thin as their purses, all welded together not by discipline or pay, but by hunger and rage. Why rage? Because Charles V, despite ruling more territory than almost any monarch in history, Spain, the Low Countries, Austria, Naples, parts of the Americas, is broke. War drains coffers faster than wine drains a cup. His men haven't been paid in months, sometimes years. The imperial paymasters hand out promises instead of coins, and promises don't feed families. By the winter of 1526, these soldiers are starving for more than bread. They want pay, plunder, and vengeance. The army is nominally led by Charles de Bourbon, the disgraced French duke who defected to Charles V after a bitter feud with Francis I. Bourbon is ambitious, skilled, and furious with his former king. For him, this campaign is personal revenge, but even his authority barely keeps the men in line. Without pay, discipline frays. The soldiers mutter, grumble, threaten mutiny. Captains whisper that if the emperor won't pay them, maybe Rome will. So the march begins. Picture tens of thousands trudging across northern Italy, their boots caked with mud, banners tattered, weapons sharp but rusting. They raid villages along the way, stripping barns of grain, churches of chalices, peasants of whatever livestock they can drag. The path they leave is scorched, terrified peasants scattering like birds before them. Priests clutch relics and pray for protection. Farmers hide their daughters in forests. Towns shut their gates and hope the storm rolls past. In Lombardy, discipline collapses further. Soldiers openly demand payment. When paymasters shrug, mutiny breaks out. The Landsknechts, those towering German mercenaries with pikes like forests of steel, are especially vocal. They chant. They threaten to abandon the march. They even rough up their officers. Bourbon, desperate to keep control, promises them riches in Rome, a carrot dangled on a very long stick. And the soldiers, hungry but greedy, march on. Think about that for a second. The army moving toward Rome is not obeying a strategic master plan from Charles V. It is obeying its own stomach. Bourbon directs it, but the real driver is desperation. These men believe the eternal city will solve their problems. Its churches, its palaces, its fat cardinals, all ripe for plunder. Rome becomes less a city in their minds than a treasure chest. As the army crosses Tuscany, the destruction intensifies. Villages burn, convents are sacked, towns pay ransoms to be spared. Florence watches nervously, calculating whether to resist or appease. Siena trembles. Everywhere, the rumors spread faster than the marching columns. The emperor's army is coming, and nothing can stop them. Refugees clog the roads, carrying children, dragging carts, whispering warnings to anyone who will listen. Inside Rome, news trickles in. Merchants, couriers, and spies bring reports of villages stripped bare, of soldiers chanting that Rome is their paymaster. Cardinals dismiss it at first. Surely Charles V, Catholic emperor, defender of the faith, would never let his army desecrate the Holy See. But others, more cynical, know better. Charles might not order it, but once a hungry army is moving, it's like trying to stop a landslide with bare hands. You, walking alongside the soldiers for a moment, can feel their mood. It's a strange mix of despair and anticipation. Spaniards joke bitterly that the Pope's chalices will make good drinking cups. Germans sing rough songs about plundering Rome, their laughter edged with menace. Italians mutter that if the Pope hadn't meddled in politics, maybe they wouldn't be here. Each man dreams of loot, gold, silver, silk, even the simple luxury of full stomachs. The papacy, meanwhile, scrambles to respond. Clement VII knows the army is coming, but he dithers. He appeals to France, begs Venice for troops, urges Florence to stand firm, but promises and letters can't march. The soldiers are days away, and Rome's defences are thin. Mercenaries are hired, but they're unreliable. The Roman militia drills, but they're amateurs, and behind the walls, ordinary citizens hear the rumours and grow nervous. By early 1527, the imperial host nears central Italy. Bourbon, barely clinging to authority, urges speed. He knows the army could disintegrate into chaos at any moment if denied loot. Rome is not just a target, it is the only way to keep his men together. He pushes them south, through rain, through hunger, through mutiny. And then comes the final act of discipline's collapse. At Milan, the mutiny turns open. Soldiers refuse to march unless they are guaranteed loot. Bourbon has no choice but to promise them Rome itself, not in whispers, not as a vague idea, but openly. March with me, and the city of the Pope is yours. The army erupts in cheers. The fate of Rome is sealed, not by strategy but by bargaining with desperation. Imagine that realization settling over you. Rome, home to the Pope, center of Christendom, stuffed with relics and treasures, has just been sold to a mob of mutinous soldiers as their payment. The eternal city is now the coin in a deal struck on a muddy Italian road. And you, walking with the column, can feel the hunger sharpening into purpose. Every step southward is a drumbeat toward disaster. Rome's frescoes, statues, manuscripts, and palaces may dazzle Europe, but to these soldiers, they are just loot waiting to be taken. So when you think of the sack of 1527, don't picture a carefully planned conquest. Picture this: an emperor too broke to pay his army, a commander too desperate to stop them, and a horde of starving soldiers marching with one thought in mind, that Rome will feed them. You've marched with Charles V's ragged host across northern Italy. You've seen their mutinous chants, their boots tearing up muddy fields, their hunger sharpening into rage. Now stop at Milan in the winter of 1526, 27, because here is where the illusion of order finally shatters. The mutiny that explodes in this city turns a half-controlled imperial army into an unstoppable mob. From this point on, their march isn't about strategy or service to emperor or pope. It's about survival, pay and plunder. And the target dangling before their eyes is Rome. Soldiers without pay. Let's be honest, nobody joins a mercenary band in the 16th century out of love for flag and country. These men fight for coin, food, and loot. But Charles V's coffers are empty. Years of war against Francis I of France have drained his treasury. Even his Spanish gold from the Americas can't keep pace with the costs of artillery, mercenaries, and constant campaigns. The imperial paymasters who arrive at Milan carry promises instead of wages for soldiers who've been fighting for months, even years, without pay. Promises aren't worth the paper they're written on. The Spanish veterans grumble first. They're seasoned, wiry men, hardened by campaigns in Naples and Lombardy. They mutter that if the emperor values them, he should fill their purses, not just their bellies, with excuses. Then the German Landsknechts chime in, these towering mercenaries famous for their plumed hats, slashed doublets and 12-foot pikes. Don't whisper complaints. They shout them, they bang their weapons on the cobblestones, demanding payment in coin or in plunder. Their leader, Georg Frundsberg, a giant of a man who once promised to hang any soldier who dishonored him, collapses in despair at the mutiny. His heart gives way under the stress, and he is carried off sick, leaving the Germans effectively leaderless. Without Frundsberg, the Landsknechts have no leash. Bourbon's bargain. Standing at the center of this storm is Charles de Bourbon, commander of the imperial army. Once a French duke, he's now a turncoat in the emperor's service. His grudge against Francis I is deep, his pride wounded, his need for victory personal. But even he can't conjure money out of thin air. Facing an army that might scatter into chaos or even turn on its officers, Bourbon makes a fateful choice. He promises them Rome. Think about that. The commander of an imperial army essentially auctions off the spiritual capital of Christendom to keep his mutinous soldiers moving. And march with me, he tells them, and Rome itself will pay your wages. It's not a formal treaty, not a royal decree. It's a desperate bribe, an oath shouted across campfires. The soldiers roar their approval. From this moment, their eyes fix south. The Eternal City is no longer an untouchable symbol. It's their purse, their pay chest, their pride. A mob in motion. The effect is immediate. Discipline doesn't return, but it mutates into focus. The army is no longer marching for Charles V's glory. It's marching for its own stomachs and purses. Every village between Milan and Rome becomes a rehearsal. Churches are stripped of chalices, barns emptied, convents stormed, priests beg for mercy, peasants hide livestock in forests, towns pay contributions to be spared. Sometimes the soldiers honor these deals, more often they laugh and loot anyway. Refugees clog the roads, carrying bundles, dragging children, telling horror stories. They say the Spaniards spit in chalices, the Germans mock relics, the Italians among them show no mercy to their own. Word spreads ahead of the army faster than its boots can carry it. By the time the soldiers leave Lombardy, villages hundreds of miles away already quake in terror. And yet, the army itself is miserable. Hunger gnaws constantly. Supplies are thin, disease creeps through camps, and the winter is bitter. Men march in rags, their shoes falling apart, their bellies empty. Still they drive forward, fueled less by strength than by the promise of Rome's treasures. It's like watching a starving wolf limp toward a herd of cattle, knowing it will strike with even greater ferocity when it finally reaches the feast. Rome's blind spot. Meanwhile, inside Rome, Pope Clement VII hears rumors of the mutiny but can't quite believe them. Surely Charles V wouldn't let his men desecrate the Holy See. Surely these reports are exaggerated peasant gossip. He continues his balancing act, writing letters, negotiating alliances, hiring mercenaries, but the truth is simple, he has no real plan. Rome's defences are thin, its militia untested, its hired troops unreliable. The Vatican's walls gleam with frescoes, not fortifications. Clement believes diplomacy can still save him. He sends envoys to bargain, to plead, to delay. But the imperial army is beyond diplomacy now. Its commander has promised them loot, and no papal bull will stuff their purses. The road south? Leaving Milan, the army heads through Tuscany and into Lazio. The march is brutal, punishing even for hardened soldiers. Food is seized at sword point, livestock driven until they collapse, villagers scattered. At times the men seem more like bandits than soldiers, a horde rather than an army. Yet there is a terrifying momentum to it. Every mile south brings them closer to Rome, and every step seems to whisper the same thought. Our pay waits there. Charles de Bourbon rides at the head, grim-faced, knowing he's unleashed forces he can't truly control. Behind him trudge Spaniards cursing their hunger, Germans singing bawdy plunder songs, Italians muttering about vengeance. The air reeks of sweat, smoke, and desperation, and over it all hangs the knowledge that Rome, glorious, rich, undefended Rome, is just weeks away. The turning point. Milan marks the turning point in this saga. Before it, the army was at least nominally fighting for Charles V, for strategy, for imperial goals. After Milan, it's fighting for itself. Mutiny has transformed it from a military force into a predator. Its hunger, its fury, and its lack of pay fuse into a single unstoppable instinct. Take Rome. And so, as you walk with them out of Milan, past burned villages and stripped churches, you realize the eternal city is already doomed. Not because Charles V willed it, not because Clement VII planned it, but because an army without pay has decided the richest city in Christendom will serve as its purse. You can hear it in their voices. A Spanish soldier mutters, "Rome will feed us." A German Landsknecht laughs, "Rome will clothe us." An Italian mercenary sneers, "Rome will pay what Milan would not." And every step southward beats like a drum, Rome, Rome, Rome. The city still dazzles with frescoes and processions, still clings to its Renaissance pride. But out there, in the muddy fields beyond Tuscany, a mob is coming, and it has already chosen its victim. You've just seen Milan erupt into mutiny. Charles de Bourbon promise his wolves the feast of Rome, and the imperial host surge southward like a starving tide. Now follow them through Tuscany and Lazio. The road to Rome is paved not with triumphal marches but with ashes, broken towns, and terrified whispers. Every step they take brings the eternal city closer to its doom. A ragged army on the move. Imagine the sight. Tens of thousands tramp along the muddy tracks of central Italy. Spaniards in patched cloaks, German Landsknechts towering in striped/slashed doublets, Italian auxiliaries dragging pikes and arquebuses. Horses stumble, wagons creak, banners flap raggedly in the cold wind. Few wear matching armor anymore. Helmets are dented, breastplates rusted, boots worn to rags, but the weapons gleam sharp enough. Swords honed on whetstones, pikes polished with grim care. This isn't an orderly column. It's a moving swarm, a caravan of predators and parasites. Women follow as camp followers, cooking meager meals, carrying children. Priests and preachers march too, some blessing the troops, others whipping them into frenzy with sermons about punishing the sinful pope. And above all, you hear the grumble of hunger, bellies empty, voices hoarse with complaint, men promising that Rome will fill them. Tuscany trembles. First comes Tuscany. Villagers hear the rumors long before the soldiers arrive. Church bells ring warnings. Peasants flee with livestock into the hills. Gates slam shut. But wooden gates don't stop desperate soldiers. Picture a small town on the Arno. The imperial vanguard approaches at dusk, shouting for bread and wine. The magistrates plead poverty, but the soldiers laugh. Doors are battered open, barns stripped bare, granaries emptied. A convent offers sanctuary. Its nuns pray fervently, but the soldiers climb the walls, snatching chalices, tearing tapestries, scattering relics. By morning, smoke curls from the rooftops. The villagers scattered, the town broken. This scene repeats itself across Tuscany. Siena pays bribes, Florence debates nervously. But most smaller towns are simply looted. Pilgrims heading for Rome turn back in terror. Refugees clog the roads south, carrying horror stories. Soldiers who mock the mass, who seize children, who scrawl blasphemies on church walls. Whether all are true hardly matters. Fear magnifies them, and fear spreads faster than any army. The army eats the land. Foraging becomes destruction. The army cannot live off its pay, so it lives off the land. Fields are trampled, olive groves cut down for firewood, vineyards stripped, herds of cattle are slaughtered on the spot, carcasses hacked apart, bones left rotting, water sources foul with waste and corpses. Villages that resist are stormed, their defenders slaughtered. Even towns that surrender often fare little better. Each act of violence isn't just cruelty, it's fuel. Every loaf seized, every goat stolen, every cask of wine drained, keeps the soldiers staggering forward another day. But the farther south they march, the more barren the land becomes. By the time they reach Lazio, the countryside itself seems exhausted, a wasteland created by their own hands. The fear in Rome. Meanwhile, in Rome, news trickles in. Merchants, priests, refugees, all bring the same tale. The imperial army is coming, and it takes whatever it wants. Cardinals whisper nervously in corridors. Senators mutter about raising taxes for defense. Ordinary citizens line up at churches for blessings. Yet, disbelief still lingers. Rome has survived Goths, Vandals, Normans, even earlier sacks in its history. Surely this is just another scare. The Pope's ministers assure the people that mercenaries are being hired, walls are being repaired, and allies will come. The city clings to illusions of safety. But behind closed doors, Clement VII paces restlessly. He reads reports of burned towns, of mutinous soldiers, of Bourbon's promises. He knows the danger. He knows Rome is a ripe target. But his nature betrays him. He hesitates, delays, hopes for negotiation. He orders fortifications strengthened but can't scrape together enough funds to pay reliable mercenaries. He writes letters to France and Venice, begging for aid, but no armies arrive. Time bleeds away, and the wolf pack draws nearer. The imperial host nears Lazio. By early spring of 1527, the imperial army crosses into Lazio, the very region surrounding Rome. Now the smoke on the horizon isn't some distant rumor. It's close enough that Roman scouts can see villages burning. The soldiers grow more frenzied. They know Rome is near. Every day they chant about it. Every night, they dream of its treasures. The Spanish veterans picture chalices filled with wine. German landsknechts dream of looted silks. Italian mercenaries whisper about the gold of the cardinals. The hunger in their eyes sharpens into anticipation. But the army is also falling apart physically. Disease begins to spread. Dysentery, fever, infections from untreated wounds. Men collapse by the roadside, too weak to continue. Yet even as corpses are left behind, the survivors stagger onward, driven by the thought that one great sack will make their suffering worthwhile. Rome prepares, barely. Inside Rome, panic grows. The Pope finally orders stronger measures. The militia is mustered. Swiss guards drill in the Vatican courtyards. Walls are inspected. The city buzzes with nervous activity, but the preparations feel hollow. The Roman militia is poorly trained, more comfortable with farming tools than halberds. Mercenaries desert as rumors of the imperial horde spread. The fortifications are solid, but without men and morale, stone is only stone. Ordinary Romans begin hoarding food. Prices skyrocket, bread becomes scarce, taverns run dry, pilgrims vanish, leaving inns empty. Processions march through the streets, carrying relics, begging heaven for protection. Priests chant litanies. Citizens make the sign of the cross, but the prayers feel like whispers against a thunderstorm. Bourbon's shadow, and at the head of the storm rides Charles de Bourbon. He knows discipline is threadbare, knows his soldiers barely obey. He doesn't care. He has promised them Rome, and Rome will be his vengeance against Francis I. His triumph against the world that cast him aside. His presence becomes a grim beacon. Where he rides, the men surge forward. Where he halts, the men grumble impatiently. To them, Bourbon is not just a commander, he is the key to the gates of Rome. The road ends at Rome. By late April, the army is camped within striking distance of the Eternal City. From the walls, Roman scouts report the terrifying sight: an ocean of tents and wagons, soldiers drilling, ladders being built, artillery dragged into place. Fires dot the night sky outside the walls. The sound of horns and drums rolls across the fields. Inside the city, bells toll, crowds gather at churches, and the Pope retreats to council with his cardinals. The question is no longer if the army will strike, it is when. And you, standing at the walls at dusk, can see it with your own eyes. The smoke of burned villages, still drifting on the horizon, the silhouettes of soldiers sharpening weapons, the endless murmur of thousands of hungry men. Rome is about to face a storm greater than any it has seen in centuries. The road of ashes has ended. The Eternal City is next. You've watched the imperial horde plough through Tuscany and Lazio, leaving fields trampled, convents desecrated, and villages scattered to the hills. Now the wolves crouch outside their chosen prize. Rome, the Pope's city, waits behind its walls, uneasy, unready, and uncertain whether prayer or powder will save it. So let's walk the ramparts together and see what sort of defense this so-called Eternal City can muster against a storm of 30,000 starving men. Rome's walls. Start with the walls themselves. Rome is no stranger to fortifications. The Aurelian walls, built way back in the 3rd century CE, still circle the city, stretching for miles. Towers stud the circuit, gates punctuate the stone, and battlements offer vantage for archers and arquebusiers alike. The Leonine walls, added in the 9th century, guard the Vatican on the western bank of the Tiber. On parchment, these defences look impressive: thick masonry, commanding towers, centuries of repair. But here's the reality: walls are only as strong as the men who hold them. And in 1527, Rome's defenders are a patchwork quilt at best. The Pope's army, sort of. Clement VII has scraped together what forces he can. At the core stand the Swiss Guard, those tall, brightly dressed mercenaries with halberds in hand and iron discipline in their bones. There are about 200 of them, the Pope's personal protectors, drilled and ready to die if needed. Their colourful stripes may look like festival costumes, but their halberds bite deep. Beyond them, it gets shaky. Rome's militia consists of thousands of citizens armed with spears, bows, crossbows, and the occasional arquebus. But these are bakers, cobblers, and shopkeepers pressed into service. Their hearts may swell with civic pride, but their hands are more used to kneading dough than drawing bows. When faced with professional soldiers, they will waver. Then there are mercenaries. Italian condottieri hired from various cities. They're competent but unreliable. Everyone knows mercenaries fight for coin, not for cause. And since Clement's treasury is more empty than a tavern barrel on Easter Monday, the coin flows thin. Some fight loyally, others are already glancing toward the gates, weighing whether it's worth staying when the storm hits. The city's mood. Walk through Rome on the eve of battle, and you feel tension in every breath. Citizens stockpile food, hiding loaves in cellars. Priests parade relics through streets, hoping divine favor might stiffen weak knees. Families crowd into churches, clutching rosaries, whispering prayers that saints will shield them. But in taverns, the mood is darker. Wine flows, tongues loosen, and rumors spread like wildfire. The Germans are less than a day away. They have ladders, taller than our walls. Bourbon has sworn to feed his men with our blood. Every rumor carries a kernel of truth, enough to keep people awake at night. Clement's dilemma. And at the center of it all, Clement VII frets in the Vatican. He paces his chambers, consults cardinals, writes desperate letters to allies. He considers fleeing to Orvieto or even to the safety of Naples, but pride and politics keep him tethered to Rome. He orders Castel Sant'Angelo prepared as a refuge, its walls stocked with food and artillery. Secret corridors, the famous Passetto di Borgo, are checked, ensuring the Pope can flee from the Vatican to the fortress if the worst comes. But Clement also knows that flight is humiliation. If the Pope abandons Rome, his authority crumbles. If he stays and loses, his life may end. It's a no-win scenario. And Clement, cautious by nature, dithers. The city waits for decisive leadership, and gets hesitation. The enemy camp. Outside the walls, the imperial host sprawls across the fields. Fires glow at night like a sea of embers. Tents sag in the rain. Wagons form rough barricades. Horses whicker nervously. Spaniards sharpen swords. Germans repair pikes. Italians mutter about the plunder to come. Hunger gnaws constantly. Their supplies are thin. Disease stalks the camp. And yet anticipation keeps them alive. Rome is right there, its domes gleaming in the distance like ripe fruit. Charles de Bourbon inspects the preparations. Siege ladders are built from felled trees, cannons dragged into place though ammunition is scarce. The army is too poor for a long siege. They must strike quickly. Bourbon knows it. The soldiers know it. And Rome, though it prays otherwise, will learn it soon enough. The Swiss prepare. Back inside, the Swiss guard polish armor and sharpen halberds. They know they are outnumbered beyond hope. 200 against tens of thousands is a cruel arithmetic. But their oath is clear. Protect the Pope at all costs. You walk through their barracks and hear them muttering prayers, sharpening blades, sharing bread. Some write letters to families they'll never see again. Others simply sit in silence, waiting for the dawn they suspect will be their last. The calm before the storm. Night falls heavy over the city. From the walls, you look out and see the flicker of enemy fires, stretching across the horizon. From the fields, soldiers look back and see the golden glow of Rome's domes, unaware of how close they are to ruin. Between them lies silence, broken only by the distant sound of drums, the occasional bark of a dog, the tolling of church bells. It's a stillness that feels wrong, like the air before a thunderstorm. Every heart inside the walls knows the truth. The army outside will not wait long. Rome's illusion. What makes this moment tragic is that Rome still clings to a shred of hope. Citizens tell themselves the walls are strong enough, that the militia will fight bravely, that divine protection will intervene. Clement convinces himself allies might arrive in time, that negotiation might still work. But you, standing on the battlements, see the reality clearer than they do. The defenders are outmatched, the soldiers outside are desperate, and desperate men fight harder than hungry lions. The curtain lifts, so here we are. May 5, 1527. Rome stands nervous but proud, its walls manned, its pope trembling in the Vatican, its soldiers sharpening blades by torchlight. Outside, the imperial horde waits, ladders ready, cannons primed, their eyes fixed on the city of saints and sinners. Tomorrow, the storm begins, and you, looking out over the flickering fires, can feel it in your bones. The eternal city is about to learn how fragile eternity can be. The night has passed in uneasy silence. Torches on the walls sputter in the damp air. Priests still murmur prayers in chapels across the city, and the Pope has not slept a wink. Now the morning of May 6, 1527 breaks, and with it, the assault begins. If you thought the mutinous march south was brutal, wait until you see tens of thousands of starving, desperate men throw themselves against Rome's walls like waves against rock. The morning mist. Dawn comes grey and heavy, with a damp mist hanging low over the fields outside the city. To the defenders on the Aurelian walls, the fog looks like mercy hiding them for a few moments longer from the hungry army camped outside. But to the imperial troops, it feels like a gift from heaven. Cover for their approach. Through the haze, you hear it. The thud of boots, the clatter of ladders, the creak of siege engines dragged into place. War drums thump a heartbeat rhythm. Orders bark in Spanish and German mingle with the mutter of prayers. Then, like a storm cloud breaking, horns blare across the fields, and the host surges forward. The assault on the walls. The first target is the Leonine walls, protecting the Vatican Quarter. Imperial soldiers swarm toward them, ladders on their shoulders, shields raised overhead, arrows and stones rain down from defenders. But the attackers press on, driven not by discipline, but by sheer desperation. They know this has to work. They cannot afford a long siege. From above, you watch Roman militia hurl stones, fire arquebuses, and jab pikes at climbers. Some fight bravely, others falter, retreating as ladders slam against the walls. The mercenaries Clement hired do their job in patches, but their morale is brittle. They're not defending their homeland, they're defending a paycheck, and everyone knows Rome's purse is already thin. Cannons roar from both sides. The imperial artillery is limited, but a few well-placed shots send chunks of masonry flying. Rome's defenders fire back from the bastions, Iron balls tearing bloody gaps in the crowded assault. Smoke mixes with mist, until the battlefield feels like a nightmare tableau of shadows, screams, and fire. Bourbon's last charge. At the head of the attack rides Charles de Bourbon, the disgraced French duke turned imperial commander. Cloaked in armor, he shouts encouragement, waving his men forward. But fate, as always, has a cruel sense of timing. As Bourbon presses close to the walls, urging ladders up, a shot rings out, some say from an arquebus, others from a crossbow on the battlements. It strikes him square. The Duke of Bourbon slumps in his saddle, mortally wounded. His men catch him before he falls. But it's too late. The army's leader is dead at the very gates of Rome. For a moment the attackers falter. Their commander is gone, their figurehead silenced. Discipline might have snapped here, the whole assault collapsing in chaos. But hunger and rage prove stronger. Instead of retreating, the soldiers erupt in fury. They roar vengeance, swarm the ladders, and redouble the attack. What should have been disaster turns into blood-soaked momentum. The walls breach. Within hours, the pressure tells. Ladders multiply. Scaling parties surge upward. Defenders grow exhausted. Some militia break and flee, abandoning their posts. Swiss guards and a few mercenary captains fight savagely, cutting down climbers with halberds, toppling ladders with long poles. But numbers win. Germans plant their boots on the battlements. Spaniards hack their way through barricades, and the defenders fall back. The gates give way too. Rams smash into wood, hinges splinter, iron bolts snap. One by one, the portals that once kept Rome safe buckle under the weight of the storm. By midday, the eternal city's walls are no longer barriers, they are doorways. Chaos inside the city. Once inside, the soldiers spread like wildfire. Streets echo with war cries. The tramp of boots, the clash of steel. The militia melts away in many quarters, some throwing down weapons, others fleeing outright. A few stubborn bands fight alley by alley, but they are cut down quickly. The invaders are too many, too furious, too hungry. Smoke rises where torches catch roofs. The cries of civilians blend with the shouts of soldiers, and the order of a city collapses into chaos. The sack has begun. The Swiss guard hold. Yet not all collapse. At St. Peter's Basilica, the Swiss guard make their stand. Outnumbered, surrounded, they form a wall of halberds on the steps of the church. Behind them priests hustle Pope Clement VII toward the secret passage leading to Castel Sant'Angelo. The Swiss know their task. Buy the Pope time, no matter the cost. And they do. For hour after bloody hour, they hack and slash, holding back waves of Spaniards and Germans. They fight until their striped uniforms are soaked in blood, until their halberds splinter, until only a handful remain. Out of 200, only about 40 survive. The rest lie in heaps on the cobblestones, martyrs to their oath. Their sacrifice isn't in vain. Clement reaches the fortress, fleeing across the Passetto di Borgo, the elevated walkway that links the Vatican to Castel Sant'Angelo. He slams shut the gates, breathless, pale, but alive. From the ramparts, he looks back towards St. Peter's where his guards lie dead, and hears the roar of soldiers pouring into the holy precinct. Rome falls. By afternoon, the city is in imperial hands. The walls are breached, the gates thrown wide, the streets overrun. Defenders lie dead or scattered. Civilians cower in corners. Churches ring with terrified hymns. The eternal city has been breached, not by Hannibal, not by Goths or Vandals this time, but by its own supposed defenders of Christendom. The Emperor's army, unpaid, uncontrolled, and unleashed, has entered the Pope's city. And you, standing amid the smoke and rubble, realize what it means. 3 days of chaos are about to stretch into months of suffering. Rome, the jewel of the Renaissance, has fallen into the hands of men who see it not as sacred ground, but as their long-awaited payment. The assault is over. The sack begins. The walls are breached. The imperial horde has poured in, and ordinary Romans scatter like pigeons in a storm. But at the Vatican, in the shadow of Michelangelo's dome, the real drama unfolds. Here, on the morning of May 6, 1527, the Pontifical Swiss Guard stage one of the most famous last stands in history. They are outnumbered, outmatched, and doomed from the start. But their halberds and their oath will buy Pope Clement VII just enough time to escape. The oath of the Swiss. Let's rewind a moment. Who are these men in bright blue, red and yellow stripes? They're the Swiss Guard, a small band of mercenary soldiers from the cantons of Switzerland, sworn to protect the Pope with their lives. In 1527, there are only about 200 of them in Rome, not nearly enough to stop tens of thousands of Spaniards, Germans and Italians storming the walls. But numbers aren't the point. These guards are professionals, disciplined, and bound by their solemn oath to defend the Pope to the death. And on this day, to the death, won't be a figure of speech. The Vatican under siege. As the Leonine walls crumble, the invaders rush towards St. Peter's Basilica, the great square, usually filled with pilgrims, merchants and processions, becomes a battlefield. Smoke from burning houses drifts across the cobblestones. Arrows whistle through the air. Spaniards shout curses, Germans bellow war cries, and the sound of drums and cannon echoes off the marble. The Swiss Guard form ranks at the base of the basilica's steps. Their captain, Caspar Roast, rallies them with calm determination. He knows what's coming. His men know too. Still, they lower halberds, shoulder swords, and stand firm. Behind them, priests and servants hustle Pope Clement toward the Apostolic Palace, ready to guide him into the Passetto di Borgo, the raised passageway leading to Castel Sant'Angelo, the last stand. The first wave crashes against them. German Landsknechts, pikes lowered, voices raised in savage glee. Steel meets steel with a scream that echoes off the basilica's facade. The Swiss slash with halberds, their long blades cleaving through armor and bone. They thrust with swords, shields locked tight. For a moment the imperial surge falters. These 200 men fight like lions, their discipline holding against chaos. But then the numbers tell. More soldiers pour in, Spaniards joining the fray, Italians pressing from the flanks. The square becomes a churning sea of bodies, blood slicking the stones, smoke burning throats. Still the Swiss refuse to break. You see them dragged down one by one. A guard swings his halberd, cutting down 2 attackers, before a sword pierces his chest. Another deflects a pike thrust only to be crushed beneath a dozen boots. Captain Roast himself fights until he collapses, hacked down in the shadow of St. Peter's. His wife, watching from their house nearby, will later be forced to witness his body mutilated by soldiers. By the end of the day, 779 Swiss Guards are dead. Their striped uniforms lie in heaps, bright colours dulled by blood and mud. They have fulfilled their oath to the death. The popes escape, but their sacrifice isn't wasted. While the square turns into a charnel house, Pope Clement VII is hustled into the Passetto. Imagine it, the narrow stone corridor, dimly lit, echoing with hurried footsteps, the Pope gasping for breath as he flees across the rooftops of the Borgo district. Below him, soldiers swarm through alleys, looting, killing, setting fire to houses. Above him, smoke curls into the sky. The Pope's robes catch on stones. His attendants pull him along, fear twisting every face. But the corridor holds, and Clement bursts into Castel Sant'Angelo, the round fortress that looms over the Tiber. Gates slam shut, portcullises drop, and cannons swivel into position. Clement VII is safe, trapped, humiliated, shaken, but alive. From the fortress walls, he looks back toward St. Peter's, where the last of his guards fall. He knows they've bought him these few minutes with their lives. He knows the Vatican is lost, and the city now belongs to the enemy. The symbolism. The slaughter of the Swiss Guard becomes one of the most enduring symbols of the sack. For Romans, it's a story of loyalty and sacrifice in a day otherwise defined by betrayal and collapse. For the papacy, it becomes a legend, proof that even in disaster, devotion can shine. Even centuries later, the memory lingers. Every year on May 6, new recruits to the Swiss Guard take their oath in the Vatican, commemorating the day their predecessors laid down their lives. They swear to protect the Pope with the same words and the same resolve. It's history turned into ritual, tragedy turned into tradition. The aftermath in the square. When the fighting at St. Peter's ends, the square is a wasteland. Corpses lie piled against the steps, weapons scattered, banners trampled. The basilica itself, spared from fire by sheer chance, is smeared with blood. Imperial soldiers jeer, some mocking the dead, others stripping bodies for armor and coin. They've broken the guards, they've breached the Vatican, and now the rest of the city lies open. The eternal city, center of Christendom, has lost its defenders. The Pope cowers behind fortress walls, his guards are slain, and the soldiers who killed them are only just beginning their rampage. And you, standing in the square as the smoke drifts and the cries of victory echo, realize the nightmare is only beginning. The Swiss Guards' stand was heroic, but it was also the prologue. The sack itself, the looting, the desecration, the horror, is about to sweep through every palace, every convent, every alley in Rome. The wolves are inside the sheepfold, and no shepherd remains to stop them. The Swiss Guard have fallen in front of St. Peter's, the Pope has fled across the Pasetto into Castel Sant'Angelo, and Charles de Bourbon lies dead from a shot on the walls. You'd think the death of their commander might scatter the imperial army, but no, if anything, it unleashes them. Like a dam breaking, the troops surge into Rome, and once inside, there's no stopping them. The gates give way, the leonine walls are cracked, ladders swarm the battlements, and the gates buckle under the pounding of rams. When they finally give way, it's as if floodwaters burst through a broken levee. Spaniards, Germans, and Italians pour in shoulder to shoulder, shouting, cursing, praying, baying, like wolves. The Roman defenders crumble. Many of the militia throw down weapons, sprinting through alleys to their homes. Mercenaries who haven't already deserted now vanish into side streets, some even switching sides to save their skins. A few stubborn bands resist, but they're cut down quickly. The walls meant to guard the eternal city now serve as doorways through which chaos floods. The roar of the streets. Once inside, the army doesn't march in neat formation. It explodes. Companies scatter into different quarters, each chasing its own prize. You hear the roar of boots on cobblestones, the clash of steel against shutters and doors, the shattering of windows. Priests drag crosses through streets, begging for calm, but the soldiers laugh and shove them aside. Imagine standing in the Campo da Fiori. Only yesterday it was filled with market stalls, the smell of oranges, the sound of hawkers. Now it is thunder and fire, soldiers setting carts ablaze, shops ripped apart, people screaming as their purses are torn from their belts. A woman runs clutching a child. She's dragged down by 3 men before she makes it to a church. Soldiers without a leash. Remember, this army is leaderless now. Bourbon is dead, Frundsberg is incapacitated, and no officer has the authority or even the desire to restrain tens of thousands of men who believe Rome is their rightful wage. What you see in the streets is not a disciplined conquest, but an uncontrolled eruption. The Spaniards, veterans of campaigns in Naples and Lombardy, spread through the Trastevere quarter, breaking into taverns, searching for wine and gold. The German landsknechts, pike still in hand, storm through noble palaces, smashing furniture, prying jewels from statues, mocking relics with drunken jeers. Italian mercenaries, knowing the city's layout better than the rest, lead comrades to the homes of cardinals and wealthy families, pointing out which doors hide treasures. The panic of the citizens. For the citizens of Rome, it's a waking nightmare. Families barricade themselves inside houses, stacking furniture against doors. Mothers huddle with children in cellars, clutching crucifixes, listening to the crash of boots above. Monks and nuns run through cloisters in terror, hiding holy relics beneath floors or burying them in gardens. But there's nowhere to hide. Soldiers kick in doors, smash through shutters, drag people from attics. Nobles are forced to reveal their treasures at sword point. Commoners are stripped of what little they own. The air fills with smoke as fires spread from house to house. Rome, which yesterday glowed with Renaissance splendor, now chokes on its own burning breath. The Pope's view. From the high walls of Castel Sant'Angelo, Pope Clement VII watches his city collapse. He sees the smoke rising, hears the roar of invaders echoing across the Tiber, and knows he is powerless. Cardinals crowd around him, some praying, others whispering that this is divine punishment. Clement paces restlessly, wringing his hands, cursing his hesitation. His city, his authority, his prestige, all vanish in the flames before his eyes. Sacred spaces desecrated. Within hours of the breach, even Rome's sacred spaces are no refuge. Churches are stormed, altars overturned, relics snatched, chalices pocketed. The Germans, some of them Protestants, take particular delight in mocking papal treasures. They dress in stolen vestments, perform fake masses, and laugh as they desecrate what Romans hold holy. To them, Looting the Pope's city feels like righteous vengeance as much as profit. Even basilicas aren't spared. Though St. Peter's itself is too massive to be destroyed outright, its chapels and treasuries are stripped. Cardinals' palaces are invaded. Their gold and silver vanish into soldiers' packs. The Vatican Library, filled with priceless manuscripts, becomes a hunting ground for anything that looks valuable or flammable. Nightfall in a captured city. By evening, the assault has transformed into occupation. Torches blaze in every quarter, throwing flickering shadows across ruined streets. Soldiers stagger drunkenly with sacks of loot slung over their shoulders. Corpses lie in gutters, blood mixing with rainwater. Families cower behind broken doors, praying the soldiers have passed them by. The noise is constant, the clash of steel, the crack of musket fire, the crash of collapsing roofs, the screams of those dragged from hiding. It is no longer battle. It is sack, raw, uncontrolled, brutal. And yet, amid the chaos, you can almost feel the soldiers' strange joy. For months, they have starved, marched, and mutinied. Now they feast, drink, and gorge themselves on plunder. Rome, jewel of the Renaissance, is their pay chest at last. The eternal city humbled. What strikes you most is the suddenness of it. One morning, Rome is a proud, glittering capital. By evening, it is a conquered ruin. Its walls breached, its defenders slaughtered, its citizens terrorized. The speed is dizzying, the destruction merciless, and you walking through the smoke-filled streets know this is only the beginning. The sack will not last a day or two. It will drag on for weeks, even months. The soldiers squeeze every ounce of wealth and life from the Pope's city. The wolves are not just inside the sheepfold, they have made it their den. The gates have been thrown wide, the wolves are inside, and the eternal city is no longer a city at all. It is a carcass, and the vultures are everywhere. Now you follow the imperial troops deeper into Rome's heart, through basilicas and palaces, through narrow alleys and glittering halls, where looting becomes the new law of the land. A city turned treasure chest. The soldiers don't move with strategy anymore, they move with hunger and greed. Every house is a chest to crack open, every church a vault, every noble a purse. You see Spaniards ripping tapestries from walls, Germans prying jewels from crucifixes, Italians dragging furniture into the street to smash it apart in search of hidden coin. The palaces of cardinals, filled with centuries of accumulated wealth, are the richest prizes. Troops storm courtyards, batter down doors, ransack libraries, strip statues of gold leaf. Cardinals themselves, if unlucky enough to be caught, are beaten, chained, and ransomed for staggering sums. Their purple robes, once symbols of sacred office, are torn and mocked, worn as drunken costumes by soldiers who laugh at the irony, looting the churches. But the real shock comes in the churches. Rome, after all, is not just another city. It's the sacred heart of Christendom. Yet now, sanctuaries are treated like barns. At Santa Maria in Trastevere, soldiers smash the altar, steal chalices, and drag priests into the street. At San Giovanni in Laterano, the papal cathedral itself, soldiers ransack reliquaries, mock relics, and set up camp among shattered pews. Some German landsknechts, influenced by Lutheran ideas, see the desecration as holy work, punishing Rome for its corruption. They sing hymns while looting, blending piety with plunder in a grotesque parody. In smaller chapels, you watch soldiers steal candlesticks, rip icons from walls, strip vestments from the backs of priests. The faithful who sought sanctuary are dragged out, their prayers drowned by laughter. Rome's most sacred spaces, meant to inspire awe, become stages for mockery. The Vatican defiled. The Vatican itself is not spared. Though Castel Sant'Angelo holds the Pope safely behind thick walls, the basilicas and palaces nearby are stormed. St. Peter's, the pride of Renaissance Christendom, is turned into a barracks. Soldiers stable horses inside, feast at its altars, and drink from its chalices. Frescoes by Raphael and Michelangelo gaze down upon men who care nothing for art, only for wine, bread, and loot. The apostolic palace is stripped bare. Tapestries are torn down, manuscripts rifled through, gold and silver carted off. Priceless works of art vanish into sacks, carried off to be melted down or sold to the highest bidder. The Vatican Library, repository of ancient knowledge, suffers theft and neglect, manuscripts scattered and trampled in the rush for more tangible wealth, ordinary houses. And then there are the ordinary homes. Soldiers knock down doors, kick through shutters, and plunder whatever they find. Poor families lose even the meager possessions they cling to. Pots, pans, clothing, even children's toys vanish into sacks. If no valuables are found, soldiers take out their frustration with fire. Whole blocks go up in smoke, flames licking rooftops, sending sparks into the already blackened sky. Families who try to flee are dragged back. Men are killed, women violated, children taken as servants or slaves. The streets become rivers of misery, lined with corpses, choked with smoke. The mockery of relics. What makes the looting especially cruel is the mockery. Soldiers don't just steal, they taunt. A crucifix is paraded through the streets with a drunk in mock priestly robes staggering behind. Sacred relics are used as dice pieces, chalices as drinking bowls. In one grotesque scene whispered about for decades, soldiers crown a donkey with a cardinal's hat and force captives to bow before it. To the citizens of Rome, it feels like the end of the world. To the soldiers, it feels like payday. Cardinals and nobles ransom. Not all loot comes from smashing doors. Many soldiers realize that live cardinals are worth more than dead ones. Captured nobles and prelates are dragged through the streets in chains, beaten until they agree to pay ransoms. Some are forced to write letters to their families begging for gold and silver to secure release. Cardinal Pompeo Colonna, an old enemy of Clement VII, gloats as rivals are humiliated. But even he cannot control the tide. The army spares no one entirely. Wealthy households are ruined, noble families stripped of generations of treasures. Rome's transformation. By the second night, the city is unrecognizable. Fires glow across the skyline, black smoke choking the air. Streets that once bustled with merchants now echo with the tramp of boots and the cries of the desperate. The smell of incense once wafting from churches is drowned by the stench of burning wood, unburied corpses, and overflowing filth. Everywhere you turn, the Renaissance dream lies shattered. Palaces that displayed art and learning now gape as hollow shells. Libraries, once filled with manuscripts, lie scattered with torn pages trampled into mud. Rome, once the proud beacon of Christendom, has become a nightmare carnival of greed. The Pope watches helpless. And through it all, Pope Clement VII peers from the battlements of Castel Sant'Angelo. He sees the smoke, hears the screams, and smells the rot drifting on the wind. His city is destroyed before his eyes, and he cannot stop it. He knows that every fresco looted, every relic mocked, every church defiled, is also a wound to his prestige. Rome is no longer the heart of Christendom, it is a ruin. Clement buries his face in his hands. His hesitation, his political games, his debts, all have led here. The eternal city has fallen because of his weakness. The weight of the moment. What you feel, standing in the streets, is the collapse not only of a city, but of an idea. Rome was meant to be untouchable, holy, eternal. Yet in 2 days, it has been gutted like any other town. Its treasures stripped, its sanctuaries mocked. The myth of Rome, like its frescoes and chalices, lies in pieces on the ground. And the looting is only the beginning. The sack will stretch on, deeper and darker, as famine and plague join fire and steel. The wolves have their pay, but their hunger is far from satisfied. You've watched the soldiers strip palaces bare, mock relics, and turn churches into stables. But loot is only one part of a sack. The other part is violence. Once Rome is in their grip, the soldiers' greed mixes with rage, boredom, and hunger, and what follows is worse than robbery. The eternal city, jewel of the Renaissance, becomes a stage for cruelty, humiliation, and blood. Streets of terror. Picture yourself walking down the Via Giulia, once lined with noble homes and lively workshops. Now, the street runs red, corpses lie in doorways, shutters hang torn from hinges, smoke curls from upper floors. Soldiers roam in packs, swords drawn, muskets slung, kicking in doors at will. Their laughter echoes as loudly as the screams of their victims. Everywhere you look, fear is the only law. A woman clutching a child runs from a house, chased by 3 Spaniards. They drag her back inside, her cries silenced by the slam of the door. An old man kneels in the street begging for mercy, and is cut down by a landsknecht, who takes his purse and steps over him without a second glance. The city's ordinary people suffer most. Shopkeepers, cobblers, beggars, all are targets. The sack spares no class. Rome's greatness is stripped down to raw humanity, and raw humanity bleeds easily. Atrocities in convents and cloisters. For many Romans, the holiest places seem like the only refuge. Nuns bar cloister doors, monks pile furniture against gates, families cram into chapels hoping soldiers will respect sacred ground, but respect died on the walls. Imperial troops storm monasteries and convents as ruthlessly as palaces. Nuns are dragged from altars, their veils ripped away, their vows mocked. Monks are beaten and forced to reveal hidden treasuries. Relics are hurled aside, tabernacles smashed, chalices drained of wine by laughing soldiers. Some of the German troops, emboldened by Protestant zeal, seem to revel in it. To them, Rome is Babylon, the whore of the apocalypse, and every desecrated church feels like a sermon of steel. Spaniards, less theological, but no less cruel, take what they want with soldiers' rights. Italians, bitter at Rome's arrogance, join in with equal fury. Nobles humiliated, even the proudest families are not spared. The Orsini, Colonna, Farnese, names that once carried power, now cower behind barricaded doors. When captured, nobles are paraded through the streets, stripped of dignity. Some are forced to carry their own treasures to soldiers' wagons. Others are tortured until they reveal hidden coin. Cardinals, too, suffer humiliation. In one grotesque scene, a cardinal is dressed in rags and paraded on a donkey while soldiers laugh and jeer. Others are chained in their own palaces, made to watch while looters desecrate their chapels. Ransoms are demanded at sword point, and those who cannot pay are beaten or killed. Mocking the faith. The sack takes on a mocking theatre. Soldiers stage parody masses, wearing stolen vestments, chanting gibberish at desecrated altars. A crucifix is raised with a drunk soldier nailed mockingly to it. A donkey, crowned with a cardinal's hat, is paraded through the forum, as soldiers force captives to kneel before it. To Romans, these blasphemies cut deeper than the loss of gold. They are wounds to the soul of Christendom. The endless screams. The worst part isn't even what you see, it's what you hear. The screams never stop, day and night, through every street and alley. Cries of pain, terror, and despair echo. Children sob, women wail, men beg, fires crackle, muskets boom, steel clashes. Sleep is impossible. For Romans trapped in their homes, the sack is not a single nightmare, but 1,000 nightmares stitched together, each one more brutal than the last. The soldiers' frenzy. Why such savagery? Because the soldiers are both victors and victims. They've marched hungry for months, unpaid and despised, promised Rome as their wage. Now that the gates are open, they take everything the city owes them and more. Some are drunk on wine stolen from cellars. Others are drunk on hatred. Seeing in every Roman a symbol of papal corruption, many are simply drunk on power, savouring the freedom to do anything without consequence, with no officers to restrain them, and no paymaster to satisfy them. The city becomes their playground of cruelty. Castel Sant'Angelo watch. From the fortress, Pope Clement VII hears it all. The crack of muskets, the roar of fire, the cries of his people. The bridge of the Pasetto feels like a thin thread separating him from the chaos. He paces the battlements, wringing his hands, muttering prayers, knowing his guards lie dead, his cardinals captured, his flock scattered. The Pope, who once schemed to balance France and Spain, is now a prisoner in his own city, protected only by stone walls and the corpses of his Swiss. He knows that if the soldiers breach Castel Sant'Angelo, his fate will be no better than the rest. The transformation of Rome. By the end of the first week, Rome is no longer a city. It is a prison. Its people are captives. Its palaces, dens of soldiers. Its streets, rivers of blood and smoke. What was once the proudest jewel of the Renaissance now looks more like a battlefield graveyard. And you, walking those ruined streets, realize the sack is not just a moment of looting. It is a collapse of order, of sanctity, of civilization itself. Rome, city of popes and emperors, is treated like any other prize. The eternal city has been turned into a hell without fire. Only smoke, steel, and endless screams. The screams haven't stopped. Rome has become a slaughterhouse. Its palaces gutted, its churches defiled. Yet amid the chaos, One figure still matters more than all others, Pope Clement VII. While his city drowns in blood and fire, the pontiff huddles behind the round walls of Castel Sant'Angelo, peering out at his ruined capital. From here you'll watch him suffer his longest imprisonment, not of body alone, but of power, dignity, and faith. The fortress of last resort, Castel Sant'Angelo, once Hadrian's mausoleum, is now Clement's cage. The Passetto di Borgo, that narrow, secret corridor, delivered him here, thanks to the sacrifice of the Swiss Guard. Its walls are thick, its bastions bristling with artillery. On paper it can hold out for months, but inside the atmosphere is suffocating. The Pope is surrounded by a cluster of loyalists, a handful of cardinals, servants, guards, and clerks. They share cramped quarters, their food dwindling daily. Barrels of grain and water line the storerooms, but everyone knows they won't last. Outside the fortress, thousands of soldiers roam freely through the Vatican Quarter, setting up campfires on the very steps of St. Peter's. From the towers, Clement can watch them loot his basilica, mock his vestments, and drag his cardinals through the streets in chains, a prisoner in his own city. The irony is cruel. Clement is both pope and prisoner, lord of Christendom, yet powerless to defend even a single parish. Each morning he climbs the ramparts and peers out at the city. He sees smoke from burning neighborhoods, hears the echo of musket fire, and sometimes even watches soldiers gambling with stolen chalices beneath the shadow of the fortress walls. Messages arrive sporadically. Some are pleas from citizens begging for intervention. Others are demands from soldiers for ransom. Captured cardinals send letters written in shaky hands, begging Clement to pay their captors before they are tortured further. Every note is another weight pressing down on him, another reminder of how little he can do. The siege within. Though Castel Sant'Angelo stands, it is not invulnerable. The soldiers outside blockade it, cutting off supplies. Inside, food dwindles quickly, bread hardens, wine sours, meat spoils, servants stretch rations thinner and thinner. Hunger gnaws even at the pontiff's table. For the Swiss Guard survivors, and the fortress garrison, it is worse. They chew stale crusts, drink brackish water, and curse their luck as disease creeps through the crowded chambers. At night, the Pope lies awake listening to the coughing of the sick, the muttering of desperate guards, and the distant shouts of soldiers mocking him from beyond the walls. Each dawn, the smell of smoke drifts in, mixed with the stench of unburied corpses rotting in the city below. Clement's state of mind. Clement VII is not a strong man by nature, and now he frays visibly. His once carefully groomed beard grows ragged, his eyes hollow. He paces constantly, wringing his hands, muttering prayers, and snapping at attendants. He curses Charles V, curses Francis I, curses himself for his hesitation. At times he rages, at others he falls into silence, staring blankly at the walls, as if hoping they might open and swallow him. His cardinals suffer no less. Some blame Clement directly, whispering that his cowardice and double-dealing brought this disaster. Others cling to him desperately, hoping his survival means theirs. They too are prisoners, trapped in the fortress while their colleagues outside are dragged through the streets, ransomed or killed. Soldiers at the gate. Outside, soldiers grow bold. They shout insults up at the fortress, daring the Pope to emerge. Some fire muskets at the battlements for sport. Others string up corpses of captured Romans in sight of the walls, as if to remind Clement that his people are suffering while he hides. The imperial commanders, what little authority remains among them, send messages demanding enormous sums of gold for peace. Clement has no choice but to negotiate, though he has little to offer. His treasury is gone, his city stripped, his allies silent, yet he stalls, hoping against hope that France or Venice will ride to his rescue. Each day he delays, more Romans die, roam outside the walls. Meanwhile, the city itself sinks deeper into misery. Families scrape together ransoms to free loved ones from captivity. Others, too poor to pay, watch helplessly as husbands, wives, or children are dragged away. Starvation grips the survivors. Food prices skyrocket. Rats scurry freely in the streets, feeding on corpses left to rot. Plague begins to stir in the filth, swelling into a new terror. From the fortress, Clement can see it all. He watches Rome transform from jewel of the Renaissance into a carcass. He can do nothing but weep and pray, and even his prayers feel unanswered. Castel Sant'Angelo as symbol. What makes this moment unbearable is not only Clement's humiliation, but what it represents. The Pope is supposed to be the shepherd of Christendom, but here he is, cornered, powerless, bargaining for his life like any other noble. The fortress, built as a tomb for emperors, has become the cage of a pontiff. The irony stings. From the ashes of the Roman Empire rose the papacy, but now even that seems ready to crumble. The endless days. Days turn into weeks. Each morning Clement rises, hoping for news of relief, and receives only fresh demands. Each evening, he listens to the city's agony, the cries of children, the laughter of drunk soldiers, the tolling of church bells turned into jeering songs. He cannot leave, cannot fight, cannot command. All he can do is endure. And you, standing beside him on the ramparts, realize the truth. The sack of Rome is not only the city's ruin, it is also the Pope's imprisonment in a fortress that feels more like a tomb. Clement VII has survived the fall of Rome, but survival is a hollow victory. For the papacy, for the eternal city, for Christendom itself, the damage is already done. The wolf pack roams freely outside. Inside, the shepherd cowers, waiting for the next demand. The Pope paces inside Castel Sant'Angelo, a prisoner in his own city, but out beyond the fortress walls, Rome itself is suffocating. Looting and violence were only the beginning. Now famine and plague creep through the ruined streets. Survivors, citizens, priests, nobles, even foreign pilgrims, stumble like shadows through smoke and corpses. And for many, the sack does not end with theft or terror. It ends with captivity and exile. The soldiers, realizing dead Romans pay nothing, soon discover live ones are far more profitable. They seize citizens by the dozens, chain them together, and parade them like cattle. Nobles and merchants are the most valuable. A wealthy banker can fetch a ransom worth his weight in silver. Cardinals are worth even more. Each is a walking treasure chest, if his family or allies can be convinced to pay. You see chains of prisoners dragged through the forum, their fine clothes torn, their faces bruised. Some are marched toward army camps, others locked inside their own palaces while soldiers send out ransom notes. Families scrape together hidden coins, melt heirlooms, sell farmland, anything to free their loved ones. But many are too poor. For them, captivity becomes slavery. The fate of women and children is often worse. Young women are taken as hostages, forced into soldiers' camps, sometimes ransomed, often not. Mothers clutching infants beg for mercy, offering jewelry, only to be torn away. Children are dragged along with their parents, bewildered, hungry, frightened. Some vanish into captivity, sold off when the army finally leaves. The sack becomes not just the plundering of buildings, but of bodies. Rome's people themselves are reduced to spoils of war. As weeks drag on, Rome transforms into something grotesque. A marketplace of human ransom. Soldiers barter captives like coin. A German sells a Roman merchant to a Spaniard in exchange for a horse. A Spaniard trades a noblewoman to an Italian captain for a chest of grain. It is commerce in human suffering, and the city becomes a living auction block. Captives beg through grated windows, their voices echoing in alleys. Spare us, pay what they ask. But for many families, there is nothing left to give. Entire households are ruined. When ransoms fail, soldiers grow impatient. Some captives are executed as examples. Others are marched away with the army when it finally moves on, never to return. Even those closest to power are not spared. Among the captives is Clement VII's own relative, Caterina Cibo, Duchess of Camerino. She is held, threatened, and only released when immense sums are paid. Cardinals, men of scarlet robes and high office, are dragged through the streets in chains, beaten when their families delay payment. The soldiers delight in the humiliation. For them, the higher the captive's rank, the sweeter the mockery. Imagine life for these captives, locked in cellars, chained in gardens, or confined in once lavish chambers now crawling with vermin. They eat scraps, drink foul water, sleep on cold stone. Some endure weeks of waiting, while negotiations drag on. Others are tortured to speed up payments, thumbs crushed, feet burned, whips laid across backs until coin appears. Every cry echoes through the city. Rome becomes a chorus of begging and bargaining. Not all are captured. Some escape, slipping out through city gates when guards are distracted. or bribing soldiers to look the other way. Refugees stream south toward Naples, east toward Orvieto, north toward Florence. They travel gaunt, ragged, carrying nothing but grief. Pilgrims who once came to Rome for blessing now flee from it, spreading tales of horror across Italy and beyond. As they scatter, they carry the image of a broken Rome. Its streets lined with corpses, its basilicas defiled, its pope caged in a fortress. These stories will ignite shockwaves through Europe. But for the survivors, they are simply unbearable memories. By midsummer, large parts of Rome are deserted. Whole neighborhoods stand silent, doors hanging open, windows shattered. Cats prowl through empty houses, scavenging scraps. Grass begins to grow between paving stones. The city that once bustled with pilgrims, merchants, scholars, and nobles now echoes with emptiness. The population plummets. Some have been killed, others taken captive, others fled. Rome, which had been swelling with Renaissance pride, is reduced to a hollow shell of itself. Even the victors suffer. With so many captives, soldiers begin to quarrel over ownership. Germans fight Spaniards. Spaniards fight Italians. Squabbles turn into skirmishes. Some soldiers are killed, not by Romans but by their own comrades in disputes over loot or ransom. The army itself frays, gnawed by greed, hunger, and disease. Plague strikes camps crowded with captives and soldiers alike. Fevers burn through tents. Corpses pile up outside city walls. What began as triumph curdles into misery, even for the conquerors. From the fortress, Clement VII watches the city empty. Bells no longer ring for mass. Markets no longer bustle with merchants. Processions no longer parade relics through streets. The eternal city, once alive with sound, has fallen silent, except for the cough of the sick, the cries of captives, and the call of crows circling above. You walk the streets stepping over corpses, past abandoned palaces, listening to the wind whistle through broken shutters. Rome feels less like a city now, and more like a grave. For many Romans, the sack does not end when the soldiers leave. Years later, families will still be paying debts from ransoms. Survivors will carry scars on their bodies and in their minds. Children taken in 1527 will grow up in foreign lands, never returning home. Rome itself will struggle for generations to recover, its Renaissance brilliance dimmed forever. Captivity, you realize, is the most lasting wound. Gold can be stolen, churches can be rebuilt, frescoes repainted, but the people broken, scattered, enslaved cannot be restored so easily. And so, as the imperial army holds Rome in chains, you understand that this sack is not just a moment of destruction. It is the slow bleeding of a city's soul, carried away captive, one family at a time. The months grind on, and Rome remains a carcass picked clean by its captors. Yet the wolves themselves are not immortal. Hunger, disease, and greed begin to rot the imperial army from within. And at the heart of this misery comes a turning point. The death of their commander Charles de Bourbon, and the strange fate of their leaderless horde. Charles de Bourbon's fall at the walls of Rome was sudden and brutal. One moment he was urging his men forward, sword flashing, cloak whipping in the mist. The next he slumped in his saddle, struck by a defender's shot. Some say it was an arquebus ball, others a crossbow bolt, but the effect was the same. The Duke of Bourbon, commander of the imperial host, was gone before his men even knew it. For a moment confusion rippled through the ranks. A leaderless army might have turned back, but these soldiers were too hungry, too desperate, too angry. Bourbon's death did not halt the storm. It unleashed it. They took his fall, not as a warning but as justification to fight harder. Their commander was dead, so the city itself became their true general, their true paymaster. His body, stripped of armor and left behind in the chaos, never received the dignity of a noble burial. The man who betrayed France, who dreamed of vengeance and power, ended as a ghost in his own army. With Bourbon dead, command passed, at least on paper, to a few officers, Philibert of Chalon, Prince of Orange, and some Spanish captains. But no one could truly control the mob. The lanzknechts followed their sergeants, the Spaniards their own captains, the Italians their vendettas. Each band obeyed hunger, greed, and plague more than any commander's order. Rome itself was the leash, and the leash was broken. The army scattered through the city, some holding prisoners, others feasting, others drinking themselves to death. Cohesion was gone. What remained was a swarm, Then came the plague. Disease always follows sack and famine, and in Rome it struck with vengeance. The streets were clogged with corpses, wells fouled, houses abandoned. Soldiers crammed into palaces with stolen food grew sick with fevers and dysentery. Rot spread through their ranks as swiftly as they had once stormed the walls. You hear the coughs first, then the groans, then the silence. Tents collapse around men who will never rise again. Soldiers drag comrades to pits, cover them with thin layers of dirt, and return to drinking stolen wine. The same fate befalls captives crammed into cellars. Rome, once choked with screams, is now choked with pestilence. The irony is bitter. The sack that was supposed to feed the soldiers now starves and sickens them. As men die, discipline rots even further. Spaniards and Germans clash in drunken brawls over loot or prisoners. Landsknechts accuse Spaniards of hoarding gold. Spaniards accuse Germans of heresy. Knives flash, swords draw, muskets fire even in the middle of the city. Romans watch from behind broken shutters as their captors turn on one another. Captains try to restore order, but their voices are drowned out. The army is no longer an army. It is a mob of survivors, each man fending for himself, each band trying to squeeze the last coin out of a dying city. From Castel Sant'Angelo, Clement VII sees his chance. He begins to negotiate, slowly, painfully, with the leaders who still pretend to command. He offers gold, promises alliances, swears obedience to Charles V, if only the soldiers will spare what little remains. The price is enormous. Vast sums of money, fortresses surrendered, political humiliation. But Clement has no choice. His Rome is broken, his cardinals captive, his allies silent. Even so, negotiations drag. Each captain demands more. Each soldier expects ransom. Clement signs what he must, his hand trembling. Every signature is another chain around the papacy, another concession to the empire. And what of Charles de Bourbon? In death, his shadow lingers. Some soldiers whisper he was struck down as divine punishment for betraying France and invading the Holy City. Others mutter that his ghost still urges them on, demanding Rome as his revenge. His name becomes both curse and rallying cry, invoked by Spaniards in taverns and Germans in camps alike. But history is clear. Bourbon's ambition ended with his death on the walls, and the army he led became a monster with no master. His fate sealed Rome's doom, and his absence left only chaos in its wake. By late summer, the sack has dragged on for months. Rome is a skeleton of itself. Captives are either ransomed or enslaved. Neighborhoods burned, libraries ruined. The once bustling piazzas stand eerily empty, save for a few soldiers gambling over bones or prisoners begging for scraps. The army, too, is bleeding out. Plague, desertion, and infighting reduce their numbers daily. By autumn, they are less conquerors than squatters in a ruined shell, clinging to a corpse of a city that no longer sustains them. For Charles V, far away, the sack is both triumph and embarrassment. His enemies are humbled, the Pope bent to his will, Rome broken. But the cost is shameful. His Catholic army desecrated the holy capital of Christendom, his reputation forever stained. For the soldiers, the sack is both payday and grave. They gained coin, wine, and captives, but lost comrades to disease, starvation, and bitter quarrels. Rome, meanwhile, gained nothing but scars. By winter you walk through Rome and feel its silence. No festivals, no processions, no scholars debating in taverns. The Renaissance hum has been strangled. Families are scattered, churches stripped, art lost. The Tiber flows as always, but it flows past ruins. The eternal city still stands in stone, but in spirit it feels dead. And you realize that the sack was not one single event. It was a season of destruction, a spring of violence, a summer of captivity, an autumn of plague, a winter of silence. Rome has been broken not in a day, but in a slow, grinding humiliation. Standing by the broken gates where Bourbon fell, you see the truth. The sack of Rome was shaped not only by greed and rage, but by the absence of leadership. When their commander died, the soldiers became wolves without a shepherd, tearing apart the city, and even themselves. And so the eternal city, once the jewel of Christendom, lies wounded, because one man fell and tens of thousands were free to unleash their hunger. Rome is not yet finished. but it is no longer eternal. The fires have cooled, the screams have quieted, but the wounds of Rome gape wider than ever. The sack is not just a Roman disaster, it is a European earthquake. From Spain to France, from Germany to England, the news spreads like a plague, shocking kings, priests, merchants and peasants alike. Everyone has an opinion, everyone has a reaction, and almost no one can quite believe that the eternal city, the Pope's city, has been dragged through the mud, like a common village. First, stay inside the city a little longer. The sack has stripped Rome bare, palaces are gutted, libraries plundered, basilicas turned into barracks, the population, once more than 50,000, has collapsed. Tens of thousands are dead, fled, or enslaved. Streets once filled with artists, scholars and pilgrims now echo with silence. Even the Tiber seems quieter, flowing past a city that has lost its pulse. The survivors are shadows of their former selves. Families search for missing relatives. Nobles count debts. Priests bury bodies in mass graves. Markets are gone. Trade halted. Festivals cancelled. Rome, the capital of Christendom, looks less like a city than a graveyard. And at Castel Sant'Angelo, Pope Clement VII remains a prisoner, bargaining with captors, stripped of power, dignity, and confidence. The Pope survives, yes, but his papacy is broken. Across Italy, shock turns to calculation. Florence, once allied with Clement, seizes the chance to revolt against Medici rule. Cities like Venice and Milan whisper relief that Rome, not they, bore the brunt of imperial wrath. Yet all of them know the truth. If Rome can fall, none are safe. The sack emboldens enemies and terrifies allies. Italy's dream of balance between France, Spain, and the papacy is shattered. From now on, Charles V looms as the dominant power, and every city-state must bow or risk ruin. In France, King Francis I burns with fury and humiliation. Clement VII had joined him in the League of Cognac against Charles V. But where is France's army now? Nowhere. Francis had promised help, but his soldiers never reached Rome in time. French courtiers mutter that their king's pride has left the Pope abandoned. Francis himself rages in letters, condemning the sack as barbaric. But his words ring hollow. Everyone sees the truth. Charles V has checkmated him. For Charles V, in Spain, the news is bittersweet. On the one hand, his enemies are crushed. The Pope is his prisoner. Rome is in ruins. His power unmatched. On the other hand, the manner of his triumph horrifies Christendom. His Catholic troops have desecrated churches, mocked relics, enslaved clergy, and treated the Pope like a common criminal. Charles protests that he never ordered the sack, that his men acted on their own in desperation. It is true, but the damage to his reputation is done. He is emperor of half the known world, yet he cannot control his own army. The Catholic monarch now carries the stain of having destroyed the capital of Catholicism. In Germany, Protestant reformers seize the moment. Martin Luther, though uneasy about the violence, cannot resist pointing out the symbolism. Rome, he says, has reaped what it sowed. The sack is divine judgment on a corrupt church, a Babylon brought low. Among Luther's followers, the sack is almost celebrated, proof that God punishes arrogance. For Catholic Germans, however, it is shame. To hear that their countrymen, German Landsknechts, desecrated altars and mocked sacraments wounds them deeply. Germany, already split by religion, now finds itself even more divided by Rome's ash. Across the Channel, Henry VIII of England and his Cardinal, Thomas Wolsey, watch with sharp eyes. The sack weakens the Pope at a crucial moment. Just when Henry wants an annulment from Catherine of Aragon, a broken Pope, beholden to Charles V, Catherine's nephew, is the worst possible outcome for Henry's plans. The sack of Rome, therefore, indirectly sets the stage for England's break with Rome and the birth of the Anglican Church. For scholars and humanists across Europe, the sack is not just a political disaster, but a cultural one. Rome had been the beating heart of the Renaissance, filled with artists' manuscripts and libraries. Now, priceless works of art and ancient texts are gone, burned, stolen, or ruined. Erasmus, the great Dutch humanist, laments the fall of a city that had once been a beacon of learning. Letters from scholars everywhere carry the same tone, disbelief that the cradle of civilization could be so desecrated. Everywhere in Europe, ordinary people talk about it. Pilgrims spread rumors in taverns. that St. Peter's itself was burned to the ground. It wasn't, though it was defiled. That the Pope had been killed, he wasn't. That angels had abandoned Rome to demons. It certainly felt like it. News in the 16th century travels slowly, but the sack spreads fast because it is so unthinkable. The Eternal City, plundered like any other town. The Pope, a prisoner in his own fortress. Cardinals, paraded in chains. For believers across Europe, it feels apocalyptic. Some whisper the end of the world is near. Meanwhile, Clement VII finally bows. To escape Castel Sant'Angelo, he signs humiliating terms, a massive ransom, ceding fortresses, and pledging obedience to Charles V. He emerges pale, thin, and broken, his Medici pride crushed. The man who once dreamed of balancing empires is now reduced to a pawn. The sack has stripped him not only of power, but of credibility. To Italians, he is the Pope who let Rome fall. To Europeans, he is the Pope who surrendered to the Emperor. And to himself, he is a man who will never wash away the memory of smoke rising from his city. The sack of 5027 is not the literal end of Rome, but it is the symbolic death of Renaissance Rome. The golden age of Michelangelo, Raphael, and Bramante is over. Patronage dries up, artists flee, scholars scatter. The Eternal City will rebuild, but it will never regain the same glow. Rome has been humbled, its aura stripped. For centuries people had believed the city untouchable, a sacred heart that would always endure. Now everyone knows the truth. Rome can fall, popes can be prisoners, eternity can end in fire. For Europe, the sack is a warning. It shows that even the greatest powers can stumble, that wealth and splendor invite ruin, that arrogance is punished swiftly. For the Church, it is a trauma that shapes theology, politics, and even art for generations. Augustine's words echo again. The city of God is eternal, but the city of man, even Rome, is dust. And you, standing on a ruined Roman street in 1527, realize the same thing. The sack is not just about looted chalices and broken frescoes. It is about the collapse of an illusion. Rome is not eternal. Nothing on earth is. The fires have burned low. The soldiers grow weary, and the Pope, pale and humiliated, signs away his freedom in Castel Sant'Angelo. The sack of 5027 is nearly over, but its legacy will echo far beyond the smoke-filled streets. This was not just another war, not just another siege. It was a moment that ripped open the fabric of Europe's imagination. The Eternal City, the Pope's city, the symbol of Christendom itself, had been reduced to rubble, ashes, and shame. Walk the streets a few months later, and you see a city transformed. Whole neighborhoods stand empty, their houses burned, and their families gone. Grass pushes up between paving stones in the Forum. Cats and dogs prowl freely where scholars once debated philosophy. The basilicas, though still standing, are stripped of their treasures. The Vatican Library is missing manuscripts. The Sistine Chapel scarred with smoke. The population, once thriving, has collapsed. Estimates say nearly half of Rome's residents either died, fled, or were carried away captive. Where once pilgrims crowded piazzas, silence lingers. Rome, once a magnet for wealth and art, now feels like a ghost town. Pope Clement VII emerges from Castel Sant'Angelo in December of 1527. After 7 months of captivity, he is gaunt, aged, his spirit broken. To secure his release, he agrees to crushing terms, a ransom of 400,000 ducats, fortresses handed over to imperial control, and humiliating pledges of obedience to Charles V. The Medici Pope, once proud and cunning, now looks like a man who has bargained away everything for survival. His reputation never recovers. Allies desert him, enemies mock him, and even his own supporters whisper that his hesitation and indecision doomed the city. The papacy itself staggers from the blow. For centuries, popes projected themselves as kings above kings. Now everyone has seen one cower in a fortress, a prisoner of his own city. Across Europe, the sack of Rome sends ripples that reshape politics and faith. In France, Francis I fumes but can do nothing. His prestige shrinks, his alliance with Clement lies in ruins, and his war with Charles V tilts hopelessly in Spain's favour. In Spain, Charles V pretends innocence, claiming he never ordered the sack. That much is true, but the damage is done. The Catholic emperor now carries the stain of having destroyed the capital of Catholicism. His enemies mock him as a king who let wolves tear apart the sheepfold, while his supporters insist the Pope brought it on himself by playing both sides. In Germany, Martin Luther and his followers interpret the sack as divine justice. Rome, Babylon of the West, has reaped its corruption. Pamphlets and sermons spread this interpretation widely, fueling Protestant resolve. For Catholics, however, the sack is a nightmare of shame. In England, Henry VIII watches carefully. A weak pope chained to Charles V means his own petition for annulment is doomed. Out of this frustration will soon come the English Reformation, forever breaking Christendom apart. Culturally, the sack shatters the illusion of Rome as the shining beacon of the Renaissance. Patrons flee, artists scatter, workshops close, Michelangelo survives, but the optimism of his age does not. Raphael is already dead, but his school breaks apart. The great projects of St. Peter's Basilica stall, frozen in poverty and fear. The city never regains its Renaissance splendor. Baroque Rome will rise in time, but it is a different Rome. Grand, yes, but haunted by the memory of fire and humiliation. The sack of 5027 marks the end of one era and the painful birth of another. Perhaps the deepest scar is psychological. For centuries people had believed Rome eternal. The phrase urbs aeterna, the eternal city, wasn't just poetry, it was conviction. Romans and pilgrims alike assumed the city, guarded by saints and built on centuries of glory, could never fall. But fall it did. Not to Persians, not to Turks, not to an outside world, but to an army that was supposed to defend Christendom. Spaniards, Germans, Italians, soldiers of the Holy Roman Emperor himself, tore Rome apart. The betrayal cut deeper than the blades. It showed that nothing, not even the Pope's city, was untouchable. Looking back, historians call the sack of 5027 a turning point. It marks the collapse of Italy's independence, the end of Renaissance optimism, and the dawn of Spanish dominance in Europe. It is also the moment when the papacy loses much of its worldly aura. The Pope will rebuild power in time, but never again will he carry the same unquestioned majesty. Rome itself, though rebuilt, will forever carry the memory of its humiliation. And you, standing at the end of this journey, feel the weight of it all. You've walked through the glittering piazzas of pre-sack Rome, watched the mutiny at Milan, marched with starving soldiers through Tuscany, climbed the walls with Bourbon, heard the screams of looted churches, and stood beside the Pope in his fortress prison. You've seen not just a sack, but a slow unravelling of a city's soul. The lesson is as sharp as any halberd. Nothing is eternal. Not emperors, not popes, not cities. Rome has fallen before, and it has risen before. But each fall leaves a scar, and this one runs deep. Now, let the noise fade. The muskets are silent, the screams distant, the fires cooled to embers. Picture the Tiber at dusk, flowing steadily past ruined bridges and scorched houses. The river doesn't care who rules, who falls, who suffers. It just flows, patient, eternal in its own quiet way. Close your eyes and imagine a deserted Roman street. The stones are still warm from the day's sun, the air faint with smoke, but for the first time in weeks, it is quiet. A single candle flickers in a church window, stubborn, defiant, still shining in the darkness. That is Rome too. Scarred, humbled, but never fully extinguished. Breathe slowly. The sack of 5027 was horror and humiliation. But history reminds us that, even in ruin, life endures. Families will return, markets will reopen, bells will ring again. Rome has been broken, but Rome has always risen. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, remember, the eternal city is not eternal because it cannot fall. It is eternal because it always gets back up. Good night. Sweet dreams.